Today, let's consider the Snowblower. This machine makes living in a snowy climate mostly tolerable. Did I say tolerable? I meant intolerable. I'm of the opinion that snowblowers are universally fairly terrible machines, and this one's no exception, and it breaks just about every time I try to use it. I've obviously got this mostly disassembled already. You know, maybe a little routine maintenance would help this thing, but today we're just going to try to get it going again. This is the axle that drives the wheels. In the middle here there's this sort of little clicker, I guess differential, that kind of locks and unlocks the two axle shafts. It's usually a spring that pushes this over and then one that kind of pulls this way. There's some little dogs in there that mate together. But the spline on this one apparently has decided it wants to be its own clicker mechanism. There's also a bushing in here that's pretty worn out, as is the end of that shaft. I should also note I did look up the axle shaft, and it's $85. And since I always found this system to work poorly at best, I think what I'm going to do is just replace it with a solid axle and see how that goes. This should be pretty straightforward. I should also mention that since I don't really know how this thing's going to handle, I'd like to preserve these parts. If I wasn't worried about that, and I wasn't going to try to correct the wear here, and I didn't have the tools to do it this way, easier way to do this would be just drill some holes in here, plug weld those two shafts together, and call it done. So, this is a 1-inch shaft that's 22 inches long, and that's a 1-inch shaft that's about 22 inches long. My lathe's nominally 24 inches between centers, so I think this is going to be a good one to use the steady rest on. Alright, so I got that straight this way and this way, but now I need the carriage outside of that. This parting blade is a little wider than it needs to be for the clip, but I don't foresee it causing any problems. There's also a bearing surface here I need to polish up. The other end's going to get the same treatment, but first I want to check the length. You know, before I do that, I was assuming that this sits with these two close together. I should probably verify that first. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Got the other end of this done. Let's look at the keyways for the wheels. The key for this is 230-ish. I don't know if it's 6 millimeters or 15/64. It's under a 1/4 inch. The keyway in the wheel is a little bit bigger than that. It's kind of a loose fit in that. And then the one on the shaft is, well, I don't even know. It's basically I can just throw an end mill at this and probably do better than what it was. should work. I'll do the other one off camera. I don't need this hole because that just stopped the spring that held tension on the little differential thing. I do need this one though. I used a transfer punch to mark the location of the hole and just lined up the two shafts, but apparently I didn't get video of actually doing that. So that hole gets a pin, and the side of this gear goes up against that pin. And then we've got a woodruff key here, which should be over from the edge of that hole half the thickness of this, and at 90 degrees to it. I don't think that was exactly the right cutter for that key, but given the way everything else fits on this, I'm going to say that's going to be good enough. Alright, so a little mock-up here. Everything looks pretty good. I might need a little shim in here to keep this gear from sliding. But before I do that, the axle rides in this little plastic bearing, which is half gone and out into the metal. So with that tightened up, I think a couple of these shims should do the trick, and I can get that roll pin back in there. Got this thing pretty well buttoned back up. I know it'll go straight now. Let's see if it'll turn. It turns out that since that latching mechanism never really worked reliably, I never unlatched it, so it's exactly 0% harder to turn. But now the drive wheels work consistently, which makes this thing a little less terrible to use. I'm still going to put a plow on that Jeep once it's done.